So next up, so Kyle and I have been going back and forth on chat, so it's nice to finally, I don't know if you can see me or not, but it's nice to finally see you. So next up we have Kyle, all the way from North Carolina, USA. We've been chatting, he's like, oh, I really want to get out there. This COVID thing really sucks. So Kyle is the Cyber Operations Director and Deputy CISO at Caliburn International, a leading professional services provider for US federal government and commercial clients. Kyle is a cybersecurity professional with more than 17 years experience developing and maturing organization security protection, detection, and response capabilities. So this next presentation will be discussing manufacturing ICS or industrial control system security operation strategies, helping identify strategies to defend industrial control system networks related to the manufacturing space. So can we give a warm welcome for Kyle, all the way from North Carolina.
Appreciate the introduction, Lucas. And hello to the AusCERT community, those attending in person and those attending virtually. Hopefully everyone can hear me well. And I guess we'll go to the next slide. So to let you know how it's come full circle, I was in Australia last in March of 2020, and I came back to North Carolina here, and everyone was in a panic in this COVID thing, and we were out of toilet paper. I couldn't get that, right? So now, today here in North Carolina, we are one of the states where everybody's in a panic, and we are out of gasoline and petrol from the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. So, so it's interesting times here, you know, in North Carolina. But I'm glad we personally go to the next slide. So background, a good chunk of it has been from the IT security side. So that's how I tend to look at the OT and manufacturing roles and engagements through that lens. This includes seeing where security operations can be similar, and unique, and especially as it relates to small businesses there. So I got motivated for this talk, due to challenges that I was seeing, with small and medium businesses. I appreciated more and more, in my career as I look at it, sort of the flow down requirements, and that. When I was in 2009, I was working in aerospace for TSCP there, which is amongst the primes, and I had to put together a secure email standard, and that was about 150 pages, and was working with the Aerospace Industries Association and Aerospace and Defense Industries Association of Europe, and in that, I was told the average supplier was 10 to 30, employees pretty much. So they couldn't handle 150-page standards. So with that, again, it helped me appreciate it, especially with connectivity with IT and OT systems, and things like ERP and manufacturing execution systems that address those challenges. And I wanted to, make sure in this presentation I cover the importance of the manufacturing industry over to small and medium businesses, and I think they've expressed the greatest challenges and provide security operations strategy. I think which also provide guidance on how to measure maturity and discuss opportunities for SOAR. So I think what I'm going to do here, I'm actually getting a blinking on the slide that's flashing. It might be my graphics card. I'm going to minimize, and when I say next slide, I'll just also call out the number of them. So hopefully that's okay. What's that?
Yeah, it's cool. You are coming through a little bit choppy, so there might be a video card there.
Okay. Let me know. So we'll go to the next slide, which is slide. So for that, manufacturing continues to be important as a priority of government. In Australia, the Modern Manufacturing Initiative and National Manufacturing Priorities, which were announced in 2020 of October, have $1.3 billion in funding through February of 2021. And the priorities of that include resources, technology, and critical minerals processing, food and beverage, medical products, recycling, clean energy, defense, and space. The head of the National COVID Task Force says manufacturing should triple its contribution to the Australian GDP. And in the US, we've had recent executive orders from the next infrastructure bill, even referenced in yesterday's executive order, which was partially as a result of that colonial pipeline attack, the focus on manufacturing and the Manufacturing Execution Partnership, which is through NIST. A lot of what I'm going to get to in terms of frameworks later came out of the funding from that Manufacturing Execution Extension Partnership. And IT and OT convergence is happening more and more. There's increased ability, to affect OT processes from that. And more cloud integration is occurring too. We know from this year, vaccines are ever important to keep the supply chain going. And the consequences are real. There can be a halt to production, safety, regulatory issues, and so on. So we'll go to the next slide, slide 5. So we had a recent trend micro survey report, which was published in 2021. It was multinational, anonymous, and online, and it emphasized smart factories. The period of that was November 20 to December 1st, 2020. IT and the same amount were OT, covering technical engineering to security.
Hey, Carl, we're kind of losing you a little bit there. Maybe, do you want to shut off your video? Because that might be consuming a little bit as well. Sorry, mate.
Sure. Nope.
No, I still can't get you. It's probably not the video then.
My apologies. What I'll do, I'm going to take out my off.
I don't know if you can hear us or not. It doesn't look like your Bluetooth headset's on, but it might be the Bluetooth headset. Would you have a different headset or maybe just use the inbuilt microphone in a laptop if you're presenting from one? Sorry, we can't hear you. Good thing this is nothing new to anyone. Over the past 12 months, it's probably happened about 1 billion times for me. All right, I'm just going to work at it. Most likely a headset issue. Thanks everyone for your patience. I could tell some more really terrible jokes. Yeah. Okay. Let me see what I got here. Let me dig deep. What did the grape do when he got stepped on? Oh, we've got one person leaving already. You haven't heard the punchline. He let out a little wine. Another one. There we go. IPv6 walks into a bar. No one talks to it. Why did the PowerPoint presentation cross the road to get to the other slide? Oh, we're back. Okay, I was telling some terrible jokes while you were...
Lucas, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I don't know what's going on. I apologize about that.
Oh, it's a good thing you're back. I was doing nothing but telling dad jokes. I think you're saving everyone now, mate. All right, take it away.
All right. Hopefully that's a little bit better. I'm going to probably pick up the pace just to cover the ground here. So we'll go ahead to slide number 7, which is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and Manufacturing Profile Ecosystem. So one of the things I was going to get is how in coming up with the cybersecurity framework, a lot of the small businesses and manufacturers really struggled. They were one of the top commenters to that there. So one of the keys is when you're going back and, I think trying to figure out where you're at in maturity and what standards and what, controls you really want to shoot for, especially in the security operations space. It's good to have a look at other things that you can relate to it. So I put this together and I put a key, to how to crosswalk and do a mapping, right? To see really getting down to the implementation example level at the bottom, how that is. And then ultimately walking that over to tools to assess maturity, such as SockCnn there. And even, as you're going into the level that you're implementing the capability there and the maturity, looking at things such as the DHS Cyber Resilience Review. But we also see that it maps to guidance that comes from the ACSC there, such as the Essential 8, into some, some relatively recent initiatives in this space, such as the cybersecurity maturity model certification. So we'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 8, which is industry threats and systems, and then into slide number 9. For that, after the Ukrainian attacks on the power grid back in 2015 and 2016, combined with the MITRE attack framework enterprise being in existence, they came up with the ICS Matrix, or started that work afterwards. And it's a great lexicon for ICS TTPs affecting the industry, and it focuses at level 0 to 2 of the Purdue architecture. And it's also in between and able to be referenced to the SANS ICS kill chain, and you can relate that to advisors, even such as once we learn about some of the TTPs with things like the Colonial pipeline attack recently. And included in that is it maps to NIST 153 Rev 4 and the ICIC 62443 series there. So we'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 10. So I picked 3 attacks that I thought were kind of relevant to the manufacturing space. So with that, we had the Dr. Reddy's attack, which is a pharmaceutical manufacturer. One of their businesses is helping to supply some of the therapeutics right now with COVID. And they got hit in October 2020 with ransomware. It caused a temporary shutdown of some of its production facilities and plants from India to the UK. Still haven't sorted, at least that I could see, the initial access, and it was a loss of productivity and revenue. That's a technique in the MITRE attack ICS Matrix. And then we've got Steelcase Furniture, and for that, they may have gained initial access with Trickoff phishing, and the global operations were shut down for 2 weeks. The ransomware was suspected. And they were able to manually deploy payloads with that using PSExec and PowerShell Empire, they suspect. So that used the exploit of remote services technique. That's what I picked out on that. And then with Oldsmar, Florida, I thought that was interesting because TeamViewer got beat up in that. And I know, that's services such as that, are problematic throughout all of manufacturing. So it's not a perfect fit in the manufacturing industry, but I think the architecture, and the problems are representative there. And they temporarily modify the sodium hydroxide level, right? So applied to manufacturing, that's a big issue, especially pharmaceuticals, if you're able to, affect that product there. I also provided a link to a recorded future interview with a ransomware group member. And in that, they basically asked, how have the interactions changed with organizations since the beginning of the pandemic? And the response was, it's definitely changed. The crisis is palpable. They're not able to pay the same amounts as before. And they were talking about organizations in general. And they said, except for manufacturers of pharmaceutical products, I think it is worth paying more attention to them. They're doing just fine, and we need to help them. So it's just something that is an ongoing threat, as we can see. And, we'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 11. And in that, in the lower right, you can see, TTP in IOC and that attack that's referenced that talks about AstraZeneca there. The interesting thing about this ransomware intrusion, and it was a good write-up by the DFIR report site, is from initial access to basically encrypting all of the main joined systems, that's 4.5 hours. And that's definitely a challenge from an incident management perspective when you're talking about going through the technical analysis to starting to sort whether you want to pay in Bitcoin and lining up payments. They were able, the asking price for that was up to $400K in this example here. So we'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 12. So for that, last November of 2020, Dragos published a threat report, an annual threat report there for the manufacturing sector. I shouldn't say it was annual, that was just a manufacturing sector report for that one. And it really, one of the big takeaways that I saw is it started to highlight the growing convergence of interconnected enterprise, operations, and what I apply to be things like ERP and manufacturing execution systems that really bridge that global, or that, that corporate network into the ICS network. Some of the big takeaways from that was more passive monitoring is needed, more evaluation of Active Directory federations and trust relationships are needed, as well as backups, especially identifying the crown jewels there. So we'll talk more about some of those systems like ERP and manufacturing execution systems. We'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 14. So for that, we've got some of those in-between systems, especially at level 4 and level 3, and applying to the manufacturing sector. We've got enterprise resource planning systems, and those really, help to translate a lot of the production forecasts, the requirements for raw material purchases, a lot of the planning elements into the accounting systems to help calculate costs, and really liaison with systems such as the manufacturing execution systems. And for those are good about connecting, between those ERP systems and, really the systems and flows on the shop floor, through, controlling those product recipes and creating batch records there that are important for things like an FDA audit here. And linking to the document management systems and SOPs. And then you've got laboratory information management systems. And for those are doing QC testings of the product, making sure that they, meet the right specs there, and track those testing results as well. And then you've got document management systems, plant maintenance systems, and advanced planning and scheduling systems. Then getting into the ICS and OT systems here to save time from the issues before. I'll just say, if you go to the MITRE attack ICS Matrix and look at the systems part, it'll give a good explanation of all of those elements there. Again, when all of those do apply to a pharmaceutical enterprise use case. So we'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 14. So in this example here, we can see how the ERP and the manufacturing execution systems really are involved, from everything like the production schedule to the logistics to where quality comes into play, and then also how you've got some of the alerts that are problematic, such as recent SAP NetWeaver alerts. Onapsis did a good write-up back in April of some of the SAP issues, and there's a lot of integrations that are happening to the cloud with that that folks need to be aware of there. We'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 15. So one of the things that I wanted to get a sense from the previous slides is you don't have to exploit OT systems in order to impact OT systems in a cyber attack. And some of what I'm reading initially on the Colonial pipeline in that example is it may have been within that zone there. But that's just stuff that I'm hearing loosely on that. With the SAP Cybersecurity framework, that was an effort out of EAS, SEC, and they brought in other frameworks such as NIST. With that was developed in 2017 and presented in Black Hat, and it was driven by the lack of effective oversight by CISOs and poor integration there and complexity. A lot of times the ERP administrator is part of IT, but often left out of meetings, and it's something that's easy to float under the radar, even with a business critical system, such as that. There's even a linkage in there to SOAR opportunities, such as automating the continuous gathering of threat data and applying detection rules to automate creation of incidents to detect those. And they elaborate on that in those. We'll go to the next slide, which is slide 16. So for that, Bill Ellis of Chipotle and Carson Zimmerman and the MITRE 10 strategies, the world-class SOC, both hit the same point, which is do a few things well. And that's especially important for especially a small, medium manufacturer, that you're not going to be able to tackle a whole big grizzly framework. I remember I tuned into the CSA talk yesterday, and they highlighted the challenge of really tackling all those controls at once. So it's important really to manage expectations and establish credibility and protect yourself, which is starting with a few things. So we'll go to the next slide, slide 17. What are the few that I would focus on? So I would first do a good job of figuring out what my critical systems and my crown jewels are, and we'll talk about some strategies to that. I think after you've got an idea of that, what you're protecting, what your business is, getting into the threat landscape. Once you have that, understanding your situational awareness and attack detection capability, and then incident readiness. Because in most incidents, especially in a low maturity environment, you're really spending a lot of those first hours, if not days, just digging out and figuring out what the heck the environment is and what your network looks like in that example. So we'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 18. So for a crown jewel analysis, I want to determine what my the critical production processes are and the system and data dependencies, especially in the ERP manufacturing execution system example. That's an important thing to look at. I want to know what the uptime and availability is. I want to know what the quality requirements are, and how those are being managed. And then identify where does the security operations capability fit. Are there any gaps in the area of responsibility, the sites that are covered by the team and resources, the scope if you've got an MSSP in parts, and really ability to perform security operations procedures. In a lot of cases in a pharmaceutical environment, that can have implications for what your quality regulations are. And it's not always straightforward. It's not like you go and you ask, in a lot of cases, and somebody's got a perfect spreadsheet and Visio diagrams. In a lot of cases, there's recent mergers and acquisitions. There's an inconsistent understanding of roles and responsibilities. Some of those critical systems that I mentioned, such as ERP, might not be documented well or might be very complex there. So that's some of the challenges. So what do you do about that? We'll go to the next slide. The biggest thing I think is just ask more than one person and keep the dialogue going. Ask for what they have in critical system lists. Don't set unfair expectations. Time box yourself, to where you want to get the best stab at it. Continue to ask those probing questions. Ask the OT personnel, what was your worst day? Forget about security. When were you up? When were you going there? Look if you have a ticketing system, and it could be on the IT OT side. See what was documented there for past outages and incidents. Another one that I found very useful is to observe cyber insurance discussions amongst the executives, right, as they're going through there, because you can hear you'll hear the back and forth, and you'll truly glean out what is important for them to keep the business running, especially with the cost of that nowadays. Look at your a lot of the OT switches to firewalls and those configurations. I've got a little screenshot of the Skeleton switch in the lower right. That's something that if you just go and you pop into some of the vendor lookups with Wireshark, you can at least say, hey, there's a Rockwell device. What are those? And just again continue that dialogue with OT. Have site risk assessments, and if you can, especially post COVID, there, see if you can go up there and take a walk and just discuss that with people. And most of all, at the end, just once you've got to where you feel like you've done what you can in that time box, just mark the criteria down, and move forward and continue to disseminate that in those executive and management and those team conversations there. We'll go to the next slide, which is slide 20. So understand your threat landscape there. Again, I think you got to have a little bit of crown jewels to get into that. Who could be attacking your organization? Why, how? Some ideas are to monitor the news, monitor things like Twitter. SANS has ICS hot takes webcast recently, which I think is awesome to highlight recent attacks there. And then dissect those intrusions and TTPs affecting your industry. So like the Revel attack that I brought up earlier, go through and take each step and line that up against the MITRE ICS matrix there. And then again, don't forget the business side, the implications there. And then understand the open source intelligence on your company related to the TTPs. And under the other big thing is know your vendors and your remote access solutions. That's another thing that kind of tends to fly under the radar. Is what your relationships are, there. So we'll go to the next slide, page 21, or slide 21. So the alienable OTX, they've actually got a manufacturing industry. If you go into that tab there, so you'll be able to see some recent pulses there. They've got 20 industries in total, so some of them there's overlap. There's a chemical industry there, so you can check that out. Also, sites such as NSSP Alert, Threat Post, the Hacker News, DFIR report are good again to look for manufacturing related attacks. And there's steps that you can take after that to reduce your threat landscape. But for me, if I'm just starting with a few things, I just want to know where I'm at to begin. What am I protecting? Which threats there? So we'll go to the next one, slide number 22. So now we're getting into situational awareness and attack detection strategies. And again, you should have a good idea of those previous two things that I talked about. And I suggest to reach out to the OT and network, IT and OT network teams. Get things like network address information and diagrams, capture PCAP, know what's connected to your OT switches, and then baseline your network traffic on a good day. So identify the IT to OT flows in relationship to the crown jewels, and then protocols and use. That's how you can also, if you get a vulnerability, you can de-escalate things in your environment pretty quickly if you know that is not in use in your environment. So we'll go to the next slide, page 23. So the next step is the baseline and detection capability. So take your top maybe 2 to 3 threats, if not more, but at least a few, and then map those to the MITRE ATT&CK, enterprise, and ICS matrices there, and take a look, apply the threat landscape to your crown jewels, and that for each tactic, identify the status of the logging, how long are you keeping those logs, where could they be rotated off to, ability to detect the activity at the network and the host level, and then who and how are OT or security operations currently monitoring related activity? Do you have any MSSPs involved, or even site resources involved? And what I would suggest to do is things like a check or an X for both logging and detection, or a stop light for that, and then to maintain that as a reference for future exercises, both to be aware and see how you're improving. We'll go to the next slide, slide number 24. So for the next one, I think it's good to perform regular asset identification, especially after you get that initial baseline, continue to do that configuration file analysis, and even eventually physical inspection. It's a lot easier to do the traffic analysis than it is to actually walk up and do that. So I would do that part less frequently. Seek design opportunities. So in site, like site acceptance and factory acceptance, that's a good time to try to fund and position, things like sensors and log collection and solutions, in that step. Especially in manufacturing pharmaceuticals, it's frequent for new plants to be built to support different products there that come online. And build and refine a logging and detection strategy. Have a consistent use case framework. I found that the Blue Team handbook is a good start, and then applying the MITRE ATT&CK ICS side to that. Seek opportunities for SOAR and automation, especially to combat alert fatigue. And in the last month, the NSA published a Stop Malicious Cyber Activity Against OT Technology recommendation document. And for that includes logging all the access attempts, including vendor or outsourced OT asset support, identifying known and unknown remote access attempts, through creating those baselines. They've got a few there. Again, knowing what your environment looks like on a good day. So we'll go to slide 25. So some opportunities I've seen through SOAR. I haven't seen it myself implemented, at the layer or the Purdue 0 to 2 level there. But for me, I think you want to really take as much pressure off of that security team as possible where you can. So a lot of manufacturers have now productivity environments in things like O365. So if you can, if you can have them focus truly on the crown jewels as much as possible, given the fact that phishing is a initial access vector, that would be a positive thing. So some examples are those phishing events, and even the case management, translating that into ticketing, perimeter IDS blocking, correlation in between the business network remote access and the manufacturing remote access. And then maybe you see a new internet connection in the OT environment. And we'll kind of have a look at a potential tool there on that side. The ACSC published a remote access to OT document. And I thought that there's some use cases to glean in that. That was in the past year. Generally, the left edge of the MITRE ATT&CK ICS framework, again, is kind of where those opportunities are. And I see OT network security monitoring tools integrating with SIEM and firewalls more and more. So we'll go to the next slide. So I think getting started with testing some of this, they've got a Forest ICS conference back in 2015 that published PCAPs of a laboratory environment. So that could be cool to grab that PCAP, and whether you're using open source like Wireshark or Grass Marlin or a commercial tool, you can go ahead and give that PCAP a start. For me, I've leveraged that, and then for OT switches there, try and grab a PCAP on that side, hold that. Again, that can also serve as a baseline. And cumulatively, across the tools, especially if you're on the open source side, it might take more than one to achieve all of these. But look for assets on the network. Look to visualize those connections. Especially in the ICS space, you won't see new assets pop up, or those even that become inactive as frequent. So you can trigger on those, and then and look to have and continue that dialogue with your OT POCs with that. So go to the next slide. We're going to look at some examples. So this is a commercial tool, and you can see it's a dashboard. It shows assets, nodes, protocols, and alerts, both at the IT and the OT level. Again, a lot of these can be accomplished with a combination of open source tools as well. So a use case that we'll look at here is a new asset potentially coming in. We'll go to the next slide, and you'll see, a new address, from an asset has appeared on the network there, and you can click on that, And then going into the next slide, in tools, you would want to go, and see, hey, what type of protocols are going back and forth with that, to even, details, on hardware components, and MAC addresses, if you can get that. So we'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 30. So for your incident response capability, you want to tailor it for those regulatory, contractual, and legal requirements. I mentioned before that a lot of like your SOPs, generically, they might not be compatible with your quality requirements there. Consider involvement from labor unions, government, and vendors there. I always think it's a good idea to include the vendors on developing the incident response plan. Consider legacy and unique systems and what you would do to tackle issues with those. Plan for the realistic mid-incident data collection and forensics. As I put it, it's always a challenge, not only with OT but in IT. When you're in the throes of it, to really exchange forensic information for the first time. So consider that with your incident response planning, and we'll get to kind of some strategies related to that. Establish a proper incident management hierarchy, which is part of that is integrating the OTIR processes with the IT side. In the Colonial example, I heard that there was $5 million that was paid out in Bitcoin. So you'll have to go back to your finance and your accounting team, for that, down to the OT engineers on the ground to rectify the situation there. So coordination is key. Consider out-of-band communication protocols there, right? So maybe getting something like a Zoom, or a Slack, on license in case your network is suspect to handle that. And then, things like ICS 4, ICS 2.0, I put in the link for LinkedIn, is an effort that came out of S4 a few iterations back to try and solve some of the incident management challenges. So go check that out. So we'll go to the next slide, slide 31. So for that, again, you got the best plan on paper, the best analysts, the best management, but you'll still feel challenged. It's about exercising it and really figuring out what folks' personalities are. When the challenge comes. So I tend to like to look at some of the YouTube channel for Tim Kennedy and Sheepdog Response, which is train like you fight. The more you sweat, the less you bleed there, and so on, right? The moral of the story is, really test your incident response processes out, and get a feel for how you would handle, some of the threats that you see, early on, and really, how are you doing with situational awareness in those threats? How fast can you piece together the environment and the architecture there? So we'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 32. So for that, I like to develop some scenarios aligned to those threat landscapes. Generically, I think that ERP manufacturing execution system compromise is a good one. To start, I won't read through all these here, but going to ICS historian credential compromise, that's in the pharmaceutical example, historians are very important there. To even like de-escalating an exercise, right? So what happens if you just get a generic malware event on a laboratory information management system? Everybody comes in there at 10 o'clock in the morning, for a tabletop in that example, they're expecting something big. What if you choose to de-escalate it there? I think that's a good tactic. And then consider the threat and environment considerations there, such as improper handling, and some of the OpEx challenges that could occur. And again, it doesn't have to always be everybody and everything at once. In that 10 o'clock example, a lot of times folks will try and schedule a tabletop on, let's just say on like tomorrow on a Friday, and certain management or engineers won't be there, right? That's the perfect time, because incidents normally happen at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning when people are on vacation and not, in the middle of the day. So part of that is simulating those organizational anomalies. What happens if you're working at your virtual, and your Zoom decides to glitch out like this right here? How do you handle that? What are your protocols? Some examples of the scenarios are listed on the right. SANS had a talk, and a few things came out of that. Singapore University of Technology and I Trust had a great scenario in that, and the SANS Program Maturity Quick Start Guide also lists some good tabletop examples in that. So we'll go to the next slide, putting it together, and then the one after that, which is SockCnn. So SockCnn was developed by Rob Vanos. It's a tool that I've seen used a lot on the SOC side to analyze maturity. It's based on CMMI. It has the ability to be customized, especially in the advanced model, which I use, and has mapping to the NIST Cybersecurity framework. So for that, that's where, when I had that Grizzly ecosystem slide earlier on, it's useful to go and map back to that to make sure that you're measuring things in a standard way. We'll go to the next slide, which is slide number 35.
Might need to wrap it up pretty quick there, Carl.
We'll get to it. Yep. So these are the top dozen that I had mapped to the NIST Cybersecurity framework, from this talk. Next slide, slide 36. This gets into how I customized the SockCnn tool, and I will publish that on the SockCnn forum there at that link after this talk. Basically, what I did is I took all of the elements from the previous slide that I marked those to critical, and you can see the NIST Cybersecurity framework mapping in the remarks column. We will go to slide 37, and what you can do is manually mark out on the left what you want to achieve for each of the framework areas, and then you'll see in the tool as you get into the tab for the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 1.1 where that maps to it. So for that is the end of my talk. I really apologize to everyone for the audio-visual issues and the blinking here and so on, but hopefully you'll be able to get these slides to serve as reference and go back and check it out. And again, I encourage you to check out this tool that I post to the SockCnn forum in the coming days.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, question?
Thank you so much, Kyle. So yeah, I think we all can appreciate the difficulties of Zoom and working from home and all that. So but very, very well done to quickly jump onto it. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions, but I'm sure if there are any, people will reach out. And there's a few nods in the audience here. So without, we might have to go straight into the next speaker. So thank you very much. Can we have a quick round of applause for Kyle?
Thank you.